Welcome, reading interventionalists. Today, we're going to have a quick review over the Fontes and Pinnell analysis process. Our goal is to identify the reader's strengths and needs in problem solving. Why is this important? To find patterns of responses that provide the most beneficial information for teachers. Some of the analysis tips include errors may often be difficult to determine. We have to look at the reading record as evidence. Form our best hypothesis based on our observations, and maintain a tentative stance when looking at reading records. Other tips include being open to new learning and possibilities, and only analyze up to the error, not beyond the error, because the reader has not yet used that information unless they repeat that statement. And do not analyze insertions or omissions. Now, in order to start the analysis process, it's great to utilize this resource. So in your resource folder, please feel free to print this. It's a guide for observing and noting reading behaviors. Section 2 includes meaning, structure, and visual information, which is where during our training, we requested some additional information. These guiding questions will help to determine if, as we read up to that scholar's error, did meaning make the biggest impact? Did structure influence that error? Or did visual information influence that error? And so let's break it down. Just a quick review. Meaning, it's the message of the story and the ideas within the story. That could include pictures, mood, emotions, photographs, and graphics. So as you're sitting close to the scholar, if you notice that they are heavily weighing on pictures, mood, emotions, photographs, and graphics, you might be able to say that meaning definitely played a role and had an impact. Let's look at structure. Structure also stands for syntax, according to Fontes and Pinnell, and that equals, does it sound natural and close to the language that children use? So as we're reading, did they, in that error that they made, is it close to the language? Is the syntax simple or complex, and is it literary or far from the language used by students? And visual information. A guiding question: how does the print look on page? So that can include similarities in letters, clusters, words, space, punctuations, and the relationship between letters and sounds. So when we're looking and analyzing errors and self-corrections, these are the following things we want to consider. So when it comes to meaning, does the meaning or the message of the story, up to and including the error, have any impact on the error? So these are the big guiding questions we want to use when we're looking at errors for message and meaning. When it comes to looking at errors regarding syntax, we want to ask ourselves, does the structure or syntax of the sentence up to and including the error influence the reader's response? So looking at the grammar and things like that, does the error fit grammatically within that English sentence? When it comes to visual information, are there visual similarities between the error and the original word that the scholar read? So this is only considering printed text only. So again, does the printed text have a visual similarity to the word the reader used as he or she read? Okay. And when it comes to self-corrections, we want to ask ourselves, what sent the student back to make the self-correction? Was it the meaning? Was it the structure? Or was there some type of visual information that might have supported that response?
In preparation for the analysis of each error the reader made, write an M in the M column, an S in the S column, and a V in the V column.
Now let's determine whether an error was made based on meaning, structure, or visual information.
His first uncorrected error occurred on page 2 of the text in the second line where he substituted the for her. Read up through the error, but don't go any further. That's all the information you have to use, since that's as far as he got when he made the error. Kate had a loose tooth. Now, would that error make sense in the story? Yes. Syntactically, could we use the for her in the sentence? Yes. Are there visual similarities between those two words? Yes. Some of the letters are similar. So for this error, circle M, S, and V in the error section because all three sources of information were used by the reader. On the same line, he again makes the substitution little for loose. Reread up through the error. Her tooth was very little. Would that error make sense in the story? Yes. Syntactically, could we use little for loose in the sentence? Yes. Are there visual similarities between the two words? Yes. So for this error, circle the M, S, and V because the reader again used all three sources of information. On page 2, line 4, other substitutions were made. First, he substituted and for but. Read up to and include that word. Katie played with her tooth, and would that error make sense in the story? Yeah. Syntactically, could we use and for but in that sentence? Yes. Are there visual similarities between the words? No. So for this error, circle the M and the S because only those two sources of information were used by the reader. Leave the V uncircled this time. Continuing on, he substituted didn't for did not. And it didn't. Would that error make sense in the story? Yes. Syntactically, could we use didn't for did not in the sentence? Yes. Are there visual similarities between the words? Yes. So for this error, circle the M, the S, and the V because the reader used all three sources of information. Finally, on line 4, he read can for come. And it didn't can. Would that error make sense in the story? No. Syntactically, could we use can for come in the sentence? No. Are there visual similarities between the two words? Yes. So for this error, circle only the V because that's the source of information that was used by the reader. On page 4, he made two substitutions, was for want and can for come. So for the first substitution, I was. Would that error make sense in the story? Yes. Syntactically, could we use was for want in the sentence? Yes. Are there visual similarities between the words? Yes. So for this error, circle the M, S, and V because the reader used all three sources of information, using only the information the reader had at that point of the reading. It fits all three information sources. Continuing on. I was my tooth to can. Now, would that error make sense in the story? No. Syntactically, could we use can for come in the sentence? No. Are there visual similarities between the two words? Yes. So for this error, circle the V only because that's the only source of information that was used by the reader. On page 5, he substituted wiggle for wiggled. Kate, wiggle. Would that error make sense in the story? Yes. Syntactically, could we use the word wiggle for wiggled in the text? Yes, up to the point of the error, but not beyond. Are there visual similarities between the words? Yes. So, for this error, circle the M, S, and V because the reader used all three sources of information. Remember, we can't go beyond the error to ask the questions. On page 6, Roberto makes his first self-correction. So we'll analyze the errors first, and then we'll move to the self-correction. Error number 1. Kate brushed her teeth and. Would that error make sense in the story? Yes. Syntactically, could we use and for after in the sentence? Yes. Are there visual similarities between the words? Yes. So for this error, circle the M, S, and V because the reader used all three sources of information. Error 2. Kate brushed her teeth and brushed. Would that error make sense in the story? Yes. Syntactically, could we use brushed for breakfast in the sentence there? Yes. And are there visual similarities between the words? Yes. So for this error too, circle the M, S, and V because all three sources of information were used by the reader. But Roberto didn't leave the errors. He self-corrected both as a result of rereading of the sentence. What made him go back and look again? Now, your response is a hypothesis only, especially in this situation where you really don't know this reader and you can't really climb into his head. Perhaps he ran out of words before he finished his thought. Perhaps he noticed that the correct letters were not present for the word brushed, or because there were too many for the word and that he'd just read. In both cases, Roberto was using the print or the visual information to go back and self-correct. So circle the V in the column of the self-correction section for both self-corrections. Remember, your goal is to try to limit yourself to the one source of information that probably sent Roberto back. There is other reading work by Roberto on page 6 as well. She wanted her teeth. Would that error make sense in the story? Yes, this story is about teeth. Syntactically, could we use teeth for tooth in the sentence? Yes. Are there visual similarities between the words? Yes. So for this error, circle M, S, and V because all three sources of information were used. You're learning how to think about these errors and self-corrections with the goal of identifying the reader's strengths and needs in problem solving. Sometimes you may think that an error should be analyzed in a slightly different way. Don't be overly concerned about that or spend a long time on it because it is the pattern of responses that provides the most helpful information to you as the teacher. The final self-correction of page 6 is on the same line where he read, "She wanted it to can." Would the error make sense in the story? No. Syntactically, can we use can for come in the sentence? No. Are there visual similarities between the words? Yes. So for this error, only the V would be circled because the reader probably used only visual information. But guess what? He didn't leave the error. Perhaps the word can did not sound right in his ear when he read the next words, and so structure sent him back to fix it. Notice that he read 2 words further on before self-correcting, and that's often the result. Sounding right is disrupted, and he knows to go back when that happens to look again. He does repeat the words and self-corrects his reading. Now, you continue with Roberto through the remainder of his reading record, asking yourself the 3 questions and circling the information in either the error or the error and self-correction sections on the recording form. Remember, if it's an error, you would only complete the column in the error section. If it's a self-correction, you would complete information first in the error section because, it was an error first, and then in the self-correction column because he fixed it. Pause the video and have a go at it on your own. It has taken a while to look at Roberto's errors on his reading record. At first, doing this analysis seems tedious, but as you practice, you will gain speed in your analysis as long as you ask yourself all the questions and you stay open to all the possibilities. Always remain tentative as you go through the analysis. Because you're looking for patterns of behavior on the part of the reader, let's tally the M, S, and V's in the error section and in the self-correction section to see how Roberto is doing. We know that Roberto made 20 errors and had 5 self-corrections, so let's see how those numbers work out with M, S, and V. In the error column, I had 19 meanings, 19 structures, and 20 visual informations. In the self-correction column, I had 0 meanings, 1 structure, and 4 visual informations. Roberto seems to use all sources of information on his initial reading attempts with a very slight edge to visual information. However, his initial errors don't reflect the use of all the sources of information working together. The same seems to be true for his self-correcting behavior. Most of them are initiated by a closer look at the visual information. We'll want to help him use the other sources of information to self-correct in a more balanced way, as well as help him to use all sources of information in his initial attempts. How does your analysis compare? You have to be sure to ask the 3 questions, consider the possibilities, and make your best hypothesis as a teacher. And knowing your reader really helps with making your hypothesis. There isn't always a right or a wrong answer in analyzing reading records. It takes being open to possibilities that have strong evidence and being knowledgeable as to how a particular reader operates with text at a particular point in time. That will be important to remember as you analyze both the errors and the self-corrections of readers. Remember, you can only analyze up to and including the error. You can't go beyond the error because the reader hasn't gone there yet in his oral reading. But if the reader goes beyond the error before rereading to fix it, you can then ask what triggered a reread at that point.
In order to summarize our analysis process of our scholars' reading behaviors, we want to be reminded that the goal is to identify the reader's strengths and needs in problem solving. This benefits us as teachers because the patterns of responses provide the most beneficial information. Some tips that we want to remind ourselves are that errors may often be difficult to determine. That's okay, but we want to look at the reading record and use that as evidence. We want to form our best hypothesis based on the observations, and we want to maintain a tentative stance when looking at the reading records, meaning we want to be open to new learning and possibilities. We also only want to analyze up to the error as mentioned in the video, not beyond, because the reader has not yet used that information, unless the scholar repeats a statement. We want to make sure that we also don't analyze insertions or omissions. Thank you for your time, and thank you for everything that you do for our scholars.